Cyclops. Written by Henry Kuttner. Narrated by Edward E. French. Chapter 1. Camp in the Jungle. Bill Stockton stood in the compound gate, watching Pedro driving the mules down to the river pasture. The swarthy half-breed's face was split by a broad grin. He twirled his black mustache and sang loudly of a cantina in Buenos Aires, thousands of miles to the east. "How the devil does he do it?" Stockton moaned, shaking the perspiration out of his eyes. "I can hardly drag myself around in this heat, and that guy actually sings." Yet it wasn't only the heat, Stockton knew. There was more to it than that. A feeling of somber menace hung heavy above this wilderness encampment. During the weeks of jungle travel from the Andes, through tropical swamp and pest-infested jungle, the feeling had grown stronger. It was in the humid, sticky air. It was in the sickly sweet, choking perfume of the great orchids that grew outside the stockade. Most of all, it was in the actions of Dr. Thorkell. He's supposed to be the greatest scientific wizard of the age, Stockton thought skeptically, but for my money he's nuts. Sends a message to the Royal Academy demanding the services of a biologist and a mineralogist, and then asks us to look into a microscope. That's all. He won't even let us get inside that mud house of his. There was reason for Stockton's bitterness. He had been literally forced into this adventure. Hardy, the mineralogist, had taken ill at Lima, and Dr. Bullfinch, his colleague, had sought vainly for a substitute. None was available. None, that is, save for a certain beachcomber who was going rapidly to hell with the aid of a native girl, bad gin, and rubber checks. Bullfinch's assistant, Dr. Mary Phillips, had solved the problem. She had bought up the bad checks, threatened Stockton with jail if he refused to come along. Under the circumstances, the one-time mineralogist had shrugged and acceded. Now he was wondering if he had made a mistake. There was menace here. Stockton sensed it with the psychic keenness of a professional adventurer. Secrecy was all around him. Why was the mine yard generally kept locked? If the mine was actually worthless, as Thorkell contended, why had Thorkell seemed so excited when Stockton had mentioned the iron crystals? Crystals Thorkell had been unable to see because of his weak vision. Then, too, there was the matter of the dicotyledoni. Certain bones Mary Phillips had found. They were the bones of a native wild pig, but the molar surfaces had proved it a species of midget swine entirely unknown to science. 4 inches long at maturity. That was odd. Finally, only an hour ago, Thorkell had blindly said goodbye, only 23 hours after the arrival of his guests. Bullfinch had, Stockton mused with a chuckle, thrown a fit. The goatish face had gone gray. The unkempt Van Dyke had bristled. "Are you attempting to intimate that you summoned me, Dr. Rupert Bullfinch, 10,000 miles, just to look into a microscope?" he had roared. "Correct," Thorkell had answered, and went back to his mud house. So far so good, but there was trouble ahead. Neither Bullfinch nor Mary would think of leaving, even though that meant defiance of Thorkell. And Thorkell, Stockton felt, was a dangerous customer, cold-blooded and unscrupulous. His round face, with its bristling mustache and bald dome, could settle into grim, deadly lines. Moreover, from the first, a quiet, unspoken sort of conflict had arisen between Thorkell and Baker, the guide who had accompanied the party from the Andes. Stockton shrugged and gave it up. Dr. Bullfinch came up behind Stockton and touched his arm. There was repressed excitement in the biologist's goatish face. "Come along," he said softly. "I've found something." Stockton followed Bullfinch into a nearby tent. Mary Phillips was there, mounting the bones of the midget pig. She was, Stockton thought, much too pretty to be a biologist. A wealth of red gold hair cascaded over her shoulders. and she had a face that belonged on the silver screen rather than in the lab. She also had a hell of a temper. "Hello, beautiful," said Stockton. "Oh, shut up," the girl murmured. "What's the matter, Dr. Bullfinch?" The biologist thrust a rock sample at Stockton. "Test this." The younger man's eyes widened. "This isn't... Hell, it can't be." "You've seen pitch blende before," Bullfinch said with heavy sarcasm. "Where'd you get it?" Stockton asked, excited. "Baker found it near the mine shaft. It's uranium ore," he said quietly, "and it's 100 times richer than any deposit ever discovered. No wonder Thorkell wants to get rid of us." Mentally, Stockton added, "And I'll bet he wouldn't stop at murder to shut us up." "Good God," Bullfinch whispered. "Radium! Think of the medical benefits of such a find. The help it can give to science." There was an interruption. A black streak shot into the tent, followed by a gaunt, disreputable dog, barking wildly. The two circled a table and fled outside again. Then there was the sound of a scuffle. Hastily, Stockton raised the tent flap. Pedro, Thorkell's man of all work, was holding the dog, while a cat retreated hastily into the distance. The half-breed looked up with a flash of white teeth. I am sorry. This foolish Paco," he pulled the dog's tail. "He does not know he can never catch Satanas. He just wants to play, though. Since Pinto went away, he is lonesome." "Yeah?" Stockton asked, eyeing the man. "Who was Pinto?" "My little mule. Pinto was smart, but not smart enough, I suppose." Pedro shrugged expressively. "Poor mule." A man came out of the gathering twilight, a tall, rangy figure with a hard-bitten, harsh face, a Puritan gone to seed. "Hello, Baker," Stockton grunted. "Bullfinch told you about the radium?" Baker said without preamble. "It's valuable, eh?" "Yeah, plenty valuable." Stockton's eyes narrowed. "I've been wondering about that, wondering why you were so anxious to come along when you could have sent a native. Maybe you'd heard about this radium mine, eh?" Baker's harsh face did not change, but he sent a glance of sheer black hatred toward the house. "I don't blame you," he said under his breath. "It does look screwy, but listen, Bill, I had a good reason for wanting to come here. If I'd come alone, Thorkell would have been suspicious. Shot me on sight, maybe. I'd have had no chance at all to investigate." "Investigate what?" Stockton asked impatiently. I used to know a little native girl. Nice kid. Mira, her name was. I thought a lot of her. One day she went off to act as Thorkell's housekeeper, and that was the last I ever heard of the girl." "She isn't here now," Stockton said, "unless she's in the house." Baker shook his head. "I've been talking to Pedro. He says Mira was here and disappeared, like Pinto, his albino mule." The swift tropic night had fallen. A bright moon silvered the compound, and suddenly the two men heard the faint, shrill neigh of a horse from the direction of Thorkell's house. Simultaneously, the figure of Pedro appeared, running from behind a tent. He cried, "Pinto! My mule Pinto is in the house! He has come back!" Before the half-breed could reach the door of the house, it opened abruptly. Thorkell appeared. In the moonlight, his bald head and gleaming, thick-lensed spectacles looked oddly inhuman. "Well, Pedro?" he asked quietly in a sneering voice. The other jerked to a halt. He moistened his lips. It is Pinto, senor," he whispered. "You were imagining things," Thorkell said with cold emphasis. "Go back to your work." "Do you think I'd keep a mule in the house?" A new voice broke in. "Just what do you keep in there, Doctor?" It was Bullfinch. The biologist emerged from the tent and approached. A lean, gaunt figure in the moonlight. Mary was behind him. Baker and Stockton joined the group. Thorkell held the door closed behind him. "That is nothing to you," he said icily. "On the contrary," Bullfinch snapped. "As I told you, I intend to remain here until I have received an explanation." "And as I told you," Thorkell said, almost whispering, "you do so at your own peril. I will not tolerate interference or prying. My secrets are my own. I warn you, I shall protect those secrets." "Are you threatening us?" the biologist growled. Thorkel suddenly smiled. "If I showed you what I have in my house, I think you would regret it," he observed, a suggestion of subtle menace in his silky tones. "I wish to be left alone. If I find you still here tomorrow morning, I shall take protective measures." His eyes behind the thick-lensed spectacles included the group in one ominous glance. Then, without another word, he re-entered the house, locking the door behind him. "Still staying, Doc?" Stockton asked. Bullfinch growled. "I certainly am." There was a brief pause. Then Pedro, who had been listening intently, made a commanding gesture.
"Come with me. I will show you something."
He hurried around the corner of the house, trailed by the dog Paco. Bullfinch, his thin lips working, followed, and so did the others. A tall bamboo fence blocked their way. Pedro pointed and applied his eye to a crack. Stockton tested the gate, which had previously been open. It was barred now, so he joined Pedro and the others.
"Wait,"
the half-breed whispered.
"I have seen this before."
They could see the mine shaft with a crude windlass surmounting it. And then a gross, strange figure entered their range of vision. It resembled, at first glance, a man in a diving suit. Every inch of the stocky body was covered with the rubber-like fabric. A cylindrical helmet shielded the head. Through two round eye plates could be seen the heavy spectacles of Dr. Thorkel. Stockton whispered. "Protective suit. Radium's dangerous stuff." Thorkel went to the mine and began to turn the windlass. Abruptly, Stockton felt a hand touch his arm. He turned. It was Baker.
"Come along," the other said softly. "I've opened the door. Cheap lock. And Mary uses hairpins. Now we'll be able to see what he's got hidden in that house." "See, the doctor will be busy in the yard for a long time," Pedro said, nodding.
Silently, the group retraced their steps. The door of the mud house was ajar. From within came the sound of a shrill neigh, incredibly high and thin,